Okay, we're on. Okay, so good morning again, everyone, and welcome to our Thursday morning Bible study as we continue with the Gospel of Mark. We are going to just jump right in and pick up from where we left last week. If you remember, if you were with us last week, we had just finished the story of the transfiguration of Jesus and looked at a variety of aspects of that story. And now we are at verse 9 of chapter 9, which is the editors are entitling The Coming of Elijah. So anybody want to start reading at verse 9?
I will read.
Okay.
The coming of Elijah. As they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them not to relate what they had seen to anyone, except when the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. Then they asked him, "Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" He told them, "Elijah will indeed come first and restore all things. Yet, how it is written regarding the Son of Man that he must suffer greatly and be treated with contempt. But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written of them."
Of him.
I'm sorry, of him.
Okay.
Go on.
So, no. So I'm getting some feedback. So somebody's line is causing a little feedback. But anyway, all right, as we always do, first impressions. Now, remember, this is a transition from the transfiguration. So the mountain they were coming down from was the mountain from where the transfiguration occurred. So what are your first impressions? Nobody has any first impressions?
Well, I'm thinking that they probably were in agreement with not saying anything about it because they were just so amazed and couldn't believe it very much themselves.
Okay.
But they definitely still had the whole Elijah thing on their mind.
Okay. So
I agree. I agree. I think they were still. I mean, they couldn't help it. I mean, they saw this. That what they thought they saw, and then they come down, and they were told not to say anything, but it's in their mind. So then now they're beginning to speak up and just ask a question because they're confused.
Right. Dee, I was going to say the same thing. They're confused and they're questioning, and now they're looking at Elijah. Why did the scribes say that he must come first? So they have a lot of questions now, especially after seeing what they saw.
okay. So, well, let's go back and now look at it step by step and see what's going on. So they're coming down from the mountain. We often use that as a phrase. What do you, when we tell someone to come down from the mountain, what are we telling them to do?
Well, we're telling them to come down to earth. I mean, come out of space or wherever you are, and you're thinking, and just come down and be here now in reality.
Okay. And sort of the coming down from the mountain in this story, what could it be a response to? What happened in the transfiguration? Who might it, in essence, be a response to in terms of coming down from the mountain?
Are you talking about disciples come back to reality? Because what you saw was, transforming maybe for you, but now you're going to come back to the real world, how people are really thinking it's actually going to happen.
And and of the three
They're coming.
characters, who
Oh.
were they? Who might that be a response to? Which of Peter, James, or John?
Peter,
What did Peter want to do?
he wanted to build the tents.
Right.
Yeah. So, and what would building the tents in essence try to do?
Well, I was thinking, aside
Make
from
them-
hospitality, keep them there.
Right.
They would have a place to stay.
Yeah, it was like an effort to preserve the moment, right?
Right.
If we build the three tents for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah, they can stay there, and we can hold on to that moment.
Right.
And Jesus doesn't really respond to that directly, but by bringing him down the mountain, the idea is we can't stay up here on the mountaintop. God gives us this glorious moment. And we have to process it and make it part of our lives, but we can't hold on to it.
Esther and
You can't
Father,
stay
Esther's
here.
father, I wanted to say, it reminds me of, when you go on retreat and you have that, that mountaintop experience and that God gives you when you're there, and you're so filled up with the Holy Spirit that you want to take that with you. You don't want to leave it there. You want to bring it here. And some retreats, before you exit, they give you an exit kind of routine so that you can come back to the real world, because you want to stay exactly where they are in that moment that you feel so close to God. And I think that's what's happening here. They were feeling so close to heaven that when they came down, they just didn't want to let go. That feeling is so overwhelming. It's so peaceful, and it's so great. You just want to harness it forever.
Yeah, anybody had that experience?
Yes. Yes. I have that experience, and I've missed it so terribly. I go on retreat at least twice a year to Holy Cross Abbey down in Berryville, Virginia, with the priests and the monks. And the life is slowed down. It's very simplistic. They pray around the clock, and I pray with them, and it kind of takes you to a different place. And there's such a sense of peace. I never want to leave it. And I've been doing this for years, but I never want to leave it. So, yeah, Dee, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's a huge part of the spiritual life. We're going to have these moments. We're going to have these mountaintop moments. But in the long run, we're meant to live in the world, and we have to be able to come down from that mountain. We don't forget the experience, but we have to somehow learn to integrate it and take it with us. But we can't stay with it there. We can't try to capture it there and stay there, or else we never move forward, right? If you never left that monastery, Esther, what would happen?
I'm sorry, Father. I was kind of laughing because I don't think the monks would accept me. but I think for me, if you never left it, you would never come back to reality and the world that you live in to do the work that God wants you to do. Because one thing I can say when I do leave, I'm so inspired and so invigorated that I just want to come back and do what God's will is for me. So I know I can't stay there because I'd become complacent, stagnant, whatever.
I wanted to share
Yeah,
that.
and I've learned
Go ahead,
that
Loretta.
if you, oh, go ahead.
No, Loretta, you go ahead.
Okay. I've learned that if you stay up on that mountain, sometimes you can't grasp the full importance of what God intended you to learn. So only will you will learn if you come down
Yeah.
off the mountain and integrate your beliefs and your actions with others.
That's a really
And I
excellent,
would,
and that
yeah.
plays out in this story when he says, "Don't say anything about it until the Son of Man rises from the dead," right? Because you're not really even going to fully appreciate what happened on that mountain until
Right.
the
Right.
Son of Man rises from the dead. So yeah, sometimes you have to leave the mountain in order to appreciate what happened on the mountain.
Well, Esther, I'm married. I just want to put that out there first before I do this thing, say this thing. And I was working with Dr. Stanley in the National Black Catholic Congress. So part of the training was to send us away to the Josephite Center in D.C. for a week. So Regina Powlett and I and another person went for a week in the, we stayed at the Josephites. And I swear I wanted to be a nun when I came out of there. I was ready to be a nun. I'm already married. So Father Bill had to say, you already made one sacrament? And so, I mean, I was so full of it. You know, the Holy Spirit, you know, I was ready to give my whole life to God. But wait a minute, I got this other person over here. And exactly what they are talking about, it was just so powerful that it overwhelmed me. And I do like Loretta said, come back down and figure out what God really wanted me to do for me going there that week.
Yeah.
But isn't
That's too
an
funny.
incident like the Transfiguration necessary to even get us to a point where we need to start thinking about doing for God? Because this is how one of the ways that we get people into the church. They come to church because it happened to me. You come to church, you get all filled up, you're ready to roll for Jesus, and then you find out it's a lot of work to it.
Yes. And you need these moments to encourage and strengthen you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so that's why you have to figure out how to integrate it into your life to remember it. You don't want to forget it or leave it behind, but you can't live in it. You know, you have to take it with you and make it part of you. Because those are the moments, you know, again, and I'm sure many of you have had it as well, especially when you are discouraged and you're not feeling the presence of God. You know, often you have to remember back when you did to remind you that God is still around. I might not be feeling it right now, but I know God is real, and I know God can be part of my life because God has been part of my life. It's just that this is going to be one of those dry times I have to get through. So all of that goes with these experiences. So yeah, so coming down from the mountain is a really important sort of spiritual moment. So it's not just having the encounter with God; it's also moving on from that encounter. And incidentally, Esther, I lived for 6 weeks with those monks. They would have let me stay, but I decided to move on.
Okay. Yeah, it's so special.
So,
Yeah.
okay. So he goes down and he tells them not to say anything to anybody except when the Son of Man rises from the dead. We talked a little about, you know, he probably told them that because they wouldn't fully understand what they experienced. But it's really interesting. They agree, but then they don't even know what he means by rising from the dead.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so this is a big moment, and there's still lots of things that they're trying to unpack. So then they ask this question about Elijah. Why would they ask the question about Elijah?
Well, I'm thinking because they had just seen him.
Yeah, I mean, they had just seen him in the episode, and what also, how might the issue of rising from the dead, what else might they made of connection with Elijah?
So I think that we talked a little bit last week about Elijah being assumed into heaven. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so they might have made some kind of connection without really understanding what rising from the dead meant. They may have also made the connection after having just seen Elijah, that Elijah was one that was taken up into heaven, you know, without actually having died. So that could be part of what's going on. You know, they're making this connection. And so what is the question? that they ask.
So why is it that the scribes are saying he has to come? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
say that Elijah must come first.
Right.
First being before what? I mean, if he has to come first, what was supposed to come second?
So is he coming first before the Messiah?
Right. Yeah.
For Jesus.
That's the issue. The idea, remember, comes from the prophet Malachi, is that Elijah will come right before the Messiah, in essence, to announce the coming of the Messiah. And so, what does Jesus say to that?
That he will come first.
Elijah will, he says Elijah will indeed come first and restore all things. Yet how is it written regarding the Son of Man that he must suffer greatly and be treated with contempt?
Okay. Go ahead. Keep reading it.
But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written of him.
Okay. All right. So he agrees that Elijah will come first to announce the coming of the Messiah and restore all things. I mean, that's probably more a reference to what the Messiah will do. That there's no indication that Elijah is the one that will restore all things. It's probably he comes first, and through his announcement, things are restored in the coming of the Son of Man, which is, of course, Jesus's term for the Messiah. But Elijah there's never anything about Elijah that says that.
Hold on.
I'm getting a lot of noise, Dee. Could you mute somebody? Okay, that's good. Go ahead, Loretta, were you going to say something?
I was saying I was getting a lot of feedback.
Oh, okay. So the suffering part doesn't actually come from Elijah, and there's no direct prediction about the Messiah suffering. So anybody know what Jesus is referring to about suffering?
Was it John the Baptist?
Well, we'll get to that, but where it says, how is it written regarding the Son of Man that he must suffer greatly and be treated with contempt? Does anybody know that what that's a reference to?
Is it in Isaiah? Isaiah? Yeah.
This is a reference to Isaiah. Now, is Isaiah talking about the Messiah? Is actually it's another term that's used for when Isaiah is talking about this person who suffers and is treated with contempt. He doesn't really call him the Messiah. What does anybody remember what he calls him? He calls him the servant. The servant of God.
Right,
okay?
The suffering servant. We refer to that term.
Right,
suffering
and
servant.
we have now coined the term the suffering servant. But in Isaiah, when you read it, God says, "Here is my servant," right? My beloved one. And it's a whole prophecy about a suffering servant.
Mhm.
And it's not clear when you read it that it is a direct reference to a Messiah, as opposed to a servant. So Jesus is making that connection. Elijah did not make that connection. And it's not clear that even the disciples would have understood the connection at the time. Okay. But Jesus is the one who's making the connection that the Son of Man must suffer. And when he talks about it being written, he is apparently referring to the suffering servant of Isaiah. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it was written. So who was that in response to? I think Loretta, you already said it.
Yeah, she said it. John the Baptist.
John the Baptist.
Yeah.
So again, here's Jesus making the connection that Elijah has returned to announce the coming of the Messiah, and he was in the person of John the Baptist, who again suffered at the hand of another, of someone who could do whatever they pleased to him, which was Herod. All right.
Mhm.
Okay. Any questions about that?
Mhm.
All right. Are we ready to move on then? So, Gwen, you want to continue to read, or does somebody else want to read Healing of a Boy with a Demon?
Okay, I can go on. So when they came to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and scribes arguing with them. Immediately on seeing him, the whole crowd was utterly amazed. They ran up to him and greeted him. He asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I have brought to you my son possessed by a mute spirit. Wherever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, grinds his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive it out, but they were unable to do so." He said to them in reply, "O faithless generation, how long will I be with you? How long will I endure you? Bring him to me." They brought the boy to him, and when he saw him, the spirit immediately threw the boy into convulsions. As he fell to the ground, he began to roll around and foam at the mouth. Then he questioned his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" He replied, "Since childhood. It has often thrown him into fire and into water to kill him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us."
Wait a minute, I'm going to move it up a little bit. Go ahead.
Jesus said to him, "If you can, everything is possible to one who has faith." Then the boy's father cried out, "I do believe, help my unbelief." Jesus, on seeing a crowd rapidly gathering, rebuked the unclean spirit and said to it, "Mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." Shouting and throwing the boy into convulsions, it came out. He became like a corpse, which caused many to say, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand, raised him, and stood up. When he entered the house, his disciples asked him in private, "Why could we not drive it out?" He said to them, "This kind can only come out through prayer."
Okay. All right. First impressions.
Yeah, when I
Well,
first read this, it seemed as though it was another, miracle worked by Jesus. But the thing that hit me most was how Jesus said this particular spirit had to come out. This can only come out through prayer. That's what struck me. Because apparently, if you're dealing with demons or evil or whatever, they all don't come out the same way. So that's the first thing that hit me.
Okay.
I want to ask about this because in some Bibles it says prayer and fasting, but we don't. It's not necessary. It's not here. So is
Right.
that an acceptable translation? Prayer and fasting.
Well, let me see. I'm going to bore you again with the Greek. But it also might be, let me look at the Greek here. All right. Okay, so yeah. It looks as though there are some manuscripts, because that is nestia is fasting. No, it's not it. So this, what I have up here, when we translate the Bible, there's not like just one Bible that they're translating. They have all these different manuscripts, that have been passed down over the ages. And so there are some manuscripts that have fasting in it through prayer and fasting. And that's what this is telling this little box that just jumped up. This word nestia here means fasting. But apparently the scholars who are putting together this Greek version, which is kind of considered the international standard, they've made the judgment that and fasting isn't in enough manuscripts to determine that that's the original Bible. So these scholars have decided that that wasn't part of the original text. So it's just a judgment call. But it's one of those things where, when people say the word of God says it and I believe it, well, we don't always know exactly. We have to make these judgments about what the actual scripture says. So apparently these scholars are saying that and fasting was not it's not part of enough manuscripts to determine that it's part of the Bible.
Thank you.
Father, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Because I have heard through prayer and supplication. Is that the same thing? What is supplication?
I would say supplication is a different word for prayer, but I don't know. Anybody have a different opinion of what supplication might mean as opposed to prayer?
Now, I was wondering if it was the same as fasting, because in certain Bibles I've heard through prayer and supplication.
Yeah. Now the other side of it is, and I haven't gotten the parallels right now. I mean, we're looking at the Gospel of Mark. It's possible that, let me see, it's possible.
I was talking in
There it is.
I wasn't unmuted.
See, I could have done it in English right here if you see my notes. That a variant reads adds and through fasting. So, but let me see. Failure to Jesus' response.
When you supplicate, aren't you asking for something or begging for something? Do you always have to ask or beg for something when you're praying?
Right. Yeah. No, you don't. So yeah, supplication is okay, no. So there is a distinction. That's a good point, Loretta. There is a distinction between praying and supplicating. Yeah. No, sorry, this I don't mean to be overly intellectual. The other two gospels do not say, they don't even bring out that thing, this can only be done through prayer. So they handle it differently. But anyway, it's what we call a variant, and so it means that there are some manuscripts that have it, but the scholars today think that that's not the majority view, that the original text says it, so they drop that off. Okay, but anyway, what do you think it means? It can only come out through prayer. What?
To me, my impression was it was about faith.
Okay. And all right, well, let's continue with some first impressions before we go into that, because we're going to jump into that issue very much on this story. Any other impressions you got from the story, just from the story itself? What do you think happened to the boy? The description of what happened to him, did that raise anything that you may have been familiar with?
I mean, it sounded like the boy died for a half second and was revived.
Okay, I mean, he could have died, but what about just his symptoms?
I think that the spirit recognized Jesus as God because he threw the boy into convulsions immediately when he saw him.
Okay,
I go with that.
did the spirit say anything?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, it's interesting. He doesn't say anything. And why doesn't he say anything?
I guess
I
it's
agree
just
with Gretchen. I agree with Gretchen with him recognizing him as Jesus, and I think that's what the prayer is all about. I mean, Jesus as God, and I think that's what the prayer part is hinting at because even Jesus prays to God.
Okay. We got getting background noise. Thanks. Okay. Yeah, I mean, we've had this in other things where Jesus approaches and the demon recognizes Jesus, and usually the demon starts shouting at Jesus, right? Why isn't this spirit saying anything?
He's inside a deaf mute.
Yeah, well, he is mute apparently. If you look at verse 17, right? He's possessed by a mute spirit. So the spirit itself doesn't speak. And it probably makes the boy not speak. So, little turns on stories. So that's one but it doesn't mean the spirit doesn't recognize Jesus, right? Because then he throws what I was getting to, if you look at the symptoms, he gets thrown down, he foams at the mouth, he grinds his teeth, he becomes rigid. The boy's having a seizure.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, we would recognize that as symptoms of seizure. Might be an epileptic seizure. We don't know we can't necessarily do it that, but the boy is having a seizure. We've seen this happen to other people, and he throws the boy into the convulsions. So this is something even in our modern world we still see happening. All right. Any other first impressions?
Monsignor.
Yeah.
Is this a situation over power versus prayer?
All right, we're going to get into that. Yeah. So as we kind of delve into this story, that's exactly what we're going to be going into. That was Renee, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go.
And Father Rich, I have a question too. I'm just kind of sitting here. How do they? Well, okay, I know the boy is in mute, but then how did the I guess people who made these decisions come to the conclusion that the spirit was a mute? And in other words, just like the other part I was talking about, are there all these different kinds of spirits that possess or evil or whatever? And you need a lot of different techniques in order to drive particular spirits out. I mean, that kind of raises a question like you don't know what you're dealing with.
Okay. Well, those are good questions. That's a good question to ask of the text. I mean, I don't know how we know or they knew it was a mute spirit. We do know the text says it, right? I have brought to you my son possessed by a mute spirit. So for some way, the father is able to identify it as a mute spirit. And it's consistent. We never hear the spirit speak. Whereas, in other stories like this, when Jesus confronts a spirit, there's often an exchange between Jesus and the spirit. Well, let's kind of go back as we do now, and let's look at the story a little bit more carefully. So when they came to the disciples, who was they who was coming to the disciples?
The four of them, Peter, Jesus, because they just came off the mountain, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's really important to, again, remember this kind of the context of this scene. Jesus, James, John, and Peter have left the disciples and they've gone up the mountain. Okay. And the rest of them, the other 9 disciples, right, are back down at the base of the mountain, and there's a large crowd with them. Okay. So apparently stuff has transpired while Jesus, Peter, James, and John are away. Okay. So they're coming now to the disciples, and they saw a large crowd, which is a reference. Jesus, Peter, James, and John sees a large crowd with the disciples, and scribes are arguing with them. All right, so clearly something has transpired in their absence. Okay? Okay.
So my thought is that, oh,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, my thought is that they tried to get rid of the demon.
Right, okay. So we're going to get into the details of what happened, but clearly something happened while they were away, you know? So like, I mean, if you were Jesus and you came down and you see this large crowd with the other 9 and they're arguing, you know, what might be going through Jesus's mind?
Oh no, what did they do?
Yeah, oh my God, what they do now? What they get themselves into? Okay. And on immediately seeing him, who's him?
Jesus.
Jesus. The whole crowd was utterly amazed. Now, why would they be amazed by seeing him?
So there's something about that transfiguration that remained physically.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. Something really happened to Jesus. And whatever it is, the crowd sees it. And they are utterly amazed. Now, there's another story back in the Old Testament of someone who comes down from a mountain.
Moses.
Yeah, and what happens there?
He had the countenance or the glory of God on him after he had been speaking with God. And then he had to cover his head for a long period of time until it waned.
Okay.
He was talking to people.
Good. So maybe a similar thing happened to Jesus, right? I mean, you know, again, Jesus goes up to the mountain. He has this encounter with God, and now he comes down, and the crowd apparently sees something different about him. We don't know, but, you know, these are little things that we don't pick up on. You know, we just kind of, because we're going right into the story. You miss these little subtle references that just upon seeing Jesus, they're amazed. So that goes back. Remember what we were talking about? Did anything really happen to Jesus in the transfiguration, or was it just for our benefit or the disciples' benefits? And, you know, to me, this goes more to something really happened to Jesus. And the people who weren't even there could tell that something had happened to him. You okay with that? Did I lose y'all?
Nope, that sounds good.
Okay.
Right.
All right, so they run up to him and they greet him. and that's where he goes, all right, so what's going on? What are you all arguing about? Okay, so now we're going to hear the story that happened while he and Peter and James and John were up at the mountain. So who's telling the story?
The Father.
The Father,
Yes.
right? Because I'm bringing you my son. Okay, but he wanted. Did he really bring the son to Jesus, or did he just want to bring his son to Jesus?
I think initially he just wanted to bring his son to Jesus, but Jesus wasn't there. It was the other 9 disciples.
Yeah. So I brought my son to you, and here's what happens. And then I asked your disciples to drive it out because you weren't around,
Exactly.
right? But they were
They could
unable
not do it.
to do so. Now, why did he even think to ask the disciples?
Well, they'd been traveling with Jesus, and Jesus had given them charge when he sent the 12 out way back in an earlier reading. He gave them charge over demons and all this other stuff.
And were they able to express it?
Apparently, way back then, but not this time.
Okay. So, we know that the disciples at one point were able to expel demons. So, it certainly could have got, the father certainly might have known about that and said, okay, well, if Jesus isn't here, he intended to bring them to Jesus, but Jesus isn't here, I'll ask his disciples, right? But they're not able to do it, even though in the past they could do it. So what's Jesus's response?
Jesus sounds like he's so tired.
Myself.
Right. And he
Wait a
sounds
minute.
tired.
There are too many people are doing it one at a time.
No, I said he sounds tired. Oh, faithless generation, how long will I be with you? How
Okay.
long will I be? So he sounds frustrated. He sounds a little tired. It's like, oh Lord, here we go again.
All right. And what else? Is anybody else saying something?
An attitude.
He's got an attitude?
That's what it sounds like to me. And it makes me think of when Moses came down from the mountain, and then he found out that they had built the golden calf, and he had an attitude. That's just my feeling.
Well, no, it's great. I mean, do you see parallels in how stories are told?
Right, yeah.
That's right. And Moses comes down and he's transformed and it's great. And then what does he confront? He confronts a golden calf and he goes, right? Now he gets angry and throws the tablets at them. But is there a parallel on the way this story is taught? Jesus comes down, he's been transformed, he's had this great experience, and now he's got to confront this problem. And
yes, there's a parallel.
He sounds like when he first hears the first part of the story, he felt like this is something that the disciples should have been able to take care of, and that there wasn't strong enough faith in order for them to be taken care of, in order for them to take care of it. However, as he gets more information about this particular situation, it sounds like as he gets to the end, but this is a little bit deeper than he thought, and it needed that when he said this one requires prayer, so that even the disciples wouldn't have been able to do it on their own anyway.
Oh, okay.
It sounded to me like he felt when he first heard it, like they should have been able to do this. But as he got more information, he realized this particular situation is such that it needed something extra.
Well, you're being very generous to the disciples.
So did Jesus?
Go ahead.
Is he just,
Did you?
Wait a minute, one at a time.
Oh, I was going to say, is he just talking to the disciples?
When he says, oh, faithless generation, yeah, how long will I be with you? How long will I endure you?
Is he talking to the people as well?
He could be talking to the people as well, but I mean, the disciples are almost certainly part of the you.
Yeah, I think he was talking especially to the disciples, but I thought he was talking to everyone.
All you need was faith.
Yeah.
The scribes, the people, the disciples, everyone.
No.
Okay.
So did Jesus get um, impatient with them or angry with them when he says, "You faithless generation," prematurely before he could find out more information?
Well, I mean, I think if you do Gwen's interpretation, that might be the case, right? Maybe he spoke a little bit too soon because as he learns more about it, he decides that maybe, you know, it was a little bit tougher nut to crack than he originally thought. That's why I said Gwen is being generous to the disciples. I'm not sure I would necessarily be that generous with them. And as we go through the story, that'll be a question. How do you know? That's why you got to love the scriptures. There's all different ways of coming at it and going into it. So we're gonna let's put that question aside for now, Gretchen. But that's what we're really gonna be looking at. So he clearly he's upset, and it has something to do with this faithless generation. So he's got it has something to do. His frustration has to do with the level of faith of these folks. So bring the boy to him. They bring the boy to him, and the spirit immediately throws him into convulsions. And you know, this is all part of what Reggie had originally said. You know, almost certainly the spirit recognizes Jesus. He behaves just like he does in other encounters, and the only difference is he's not speaking. And that kind of goes back to the idea that it was a mute spirit. And the boy, it's not just that the boy is mute, it's also that the spirit is mute. Jesus asked how long it's been happening to him, since childhood. And he explained, what do you think that has anything to do with anything?
So my 21st century head says that he was probably born with this condition. And it has not been able to be explained except that he was born demonized.
Okay, yeah, so the idea since childhood, it's been at least a while, right? It didn't just start like 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's establishing that this demon, his heart set in this person. And when the father is explaining it, because it's been so long and it often tries to kill him and throws him in the fire or the water, and he says, but if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. So why is the history of this significant, at least to the father? I mean, if you're the father, how do you feel right now?
I think he's the term long suffering. I think that's how he's felt because this has been going on forever since the child was born. And this particular spirit seems to be, I don't know, like the other ones, there were possessions and things like this, but this particular spirit seems to be hell bent on killing this child. I mean, and particularly harmful. So the father at this point is just very, I'm sure he's fearful, tired, frustrated. You know, he's maybe lost hope. So it's like,
Yeah.
if you can do anything, please.
He's desperate.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you know, that's exactly, I think, why we're told all of these things. This is not just something that happened. This father has been living with this happening to his child for forever, and nobody seems to be able to do anything about it. And so he's just coming to Jesus sort of like it's a last desperate, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us.
And he doesn't say on my child. He's pointing out it's not just the child that needs the help. We both need it.
Okay, and let's play that out as Jesus gives the response. No, go ahead. So what does Jesus say in verse 23 then? How's Jesus respond to that?
Well, he says, if you can, and Jesus, I get the feeling like Jesus is like, if they don't have a question mark, they just have an exclamation mark, but I get the feeling it's like, if you can, it's like,
Yeah.
Why do you believe it's something that might not be able to happen?
Right. If you can, I mean, like, what do you mean if I can? Of course I can. But he doesn't say, of course I can. What does he say?
No, everything's possible if one has faith. So it's
so go back to what you're saying, that help us, right? Have compassion on us and help us. So who needs help here?
So the father, the family needs the help with their faith. Everybody has to realize that what Jesus does has to be accompanied by their faith.
And exactly. And I love, this is one of my favorite lines in the Bible. I do believe, help my unbelief.
Yeah.
What do you think that means?
I mean, he's asking for him to help him with his faith.
And what's he trying to say?
He has faith, but he might not have enough faith to be able to heal his son.
And it's a struggle. I think it's a struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
It sounds like his faith has been shaken.
That is so human of us, because we all go through it. That is so human of us.
Yes,
we do have faith. Sometimes our faith wanes.
Yes. Yes.
And that's why I love this line. Faith isn't an on-off switch. It's not either on and you got it, or it's off and you don't got it. The reality is we got it, but we struggle with it. And we need help with our faith. And so I believe, but help my unbelief. Help me with the part that is struggling to believe. And I think that's so important, in our faith life, to realize that, it's not all or nothing. We can have faith, and yet we can also struggle in our faith. When people tell me that they've had a hard experience and they just go, I'm so angry at God, and I blah, blah, blah. And I say, well, at least you still believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
And they go, what do you mean? I said, well, if you're angry at God, you still believe there's a God to be angry at. That's good. You have faith. You just need help with your unbelief.
Me as an individual, I relate to that so well, because that did stand out to me, because I am always asking God to help me with my faith, to help me, because there are people that I know, and there's one person in particular that's in my head, and I'm not going to call their name, but this person, his faith is so strong that it seems that nothing will shake it. And I'm always saying, God, give me that, and that's what I always strive for. That's what I strive for on a daily basis.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons it's one of my favorite lines. I do believe, help my unbelief. I think that is really at the heart of the spiritual life. We're never all there, and we're never all not there. We're in the middle somewhere where we've got faith and we struggle with it. And
for them, just to say, for them, he believes in God. He knows there's a God. He's been probably shown evidence there's God, but they've been going through this so long. It's like, okay, I believe in you, God, but this seemed to be impossible situation. And okay, you said you might be able, I said you might be able to heal it, but I don't really see it. I can't really see it because I've been through this struggle for so long and nothing had happened. nothing has happened. So, that's where his faith is shaken because he's been through this so long and he's prayed and he knows there's God and there is, the thing is, okay, I don't even believe it's going to happen that my son is going to be healed. We get to that point.
Hmm. Yeah. So I would hope that all of us that somehow can remember this line. I do believe, help my unbelief, because I think it is so critical to what happens to us in our faith journey, and it's really a legitimate prayer to say to God, I do believe, help my unbelief.
But Father Rich, sometimes you can, well, not you in particular, but in general, one can think about how authentic is it that you're asking. When you're asking for something, how honest is it deep down in your soul? It can sound authentic, like the statement right here, I do believe, help my unbelief. But you can say it and it can mean one thing, and someone else can say it and it can mean something different.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously we'd hope that all of us, when we talk to God, would be authentic. After all, God knows what's authentic. It's a question of whether we can. But but in that regard, I think it is quite authentic to be able to say, I believe, but I need help with my unbelief. And because again, to me, faith isn't just an on-off switch. It's something that grows and we struggle with, and it waxes and it wanes, and that's all part of the human experience. So we shouldn't knock ourselves when we're struggling with our faith. The solution isn't to beat ourselves up. The solution is to ask God to help us with our faith. So all right. So Jesus, rebukes the unclean spirit, commands them to leave him. He comes out of him and never to enter him again. I mean, so don't even think about coming back. And he throws the boys into convulsions. It comes out, and he becomes like a corpse, which causes many to say he is dead. Did he die?
No, because it says became like a corpse. It didn't say that he died.
Okay. You could say that. I mean, but could he have died even if he became like a corpse?
Yes, he could have died.
Yes.
Died.
Have you ever seen someone have a convulsion in person? A grand mal convulsion?
Yes, I have.
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And
Look at the
because
part that says that he became like a corpse, but then it said, but Jesus took him by the hand, raised him. What was that all about? Raised him.
Well, there you go. I mean, and I think that's the thing. I don't know necessarily that we have to conclude absolutely that he died. But what do you think the idea of raising him? Didn't we hear that phrase before?
Yes,
That the woman took her by the hand and raised her up, and then she began to wait on them.
Oh, the woman with the fever.
Yes.
The mother-in-law, right?
The mother-in-law.
Yeah.
What is that? What's going on there? Why? I mean, it's very significant, and it happens in other cases too, where Jesus heals and then takes the person by the hand and raises them up.
But wasn't Jesus himself raised from the dead?
Yeah. It's. Go ahead.
I think that the author, and when they put the Bible together and all of these stories, they tried to use common language that would send us to Jesus raising from the dead, so that we would have that language and that symbolism already implanted in our minds from these other stories. So they use it's a literary tactic, or we used to say in English. It's something that they use in writing.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, this is where you have to give the authors credit for some input, right? The Spirit inspiring them. I don't think it's by accident. Mark tells the story in a way that it is also a precursor to what's going to happen to Jesus. And in fact, the way we know that is that the Greek verb that Mark uses here is the exact same Greek verb that he uses when he talks about Jesus rising from the dead. So, he could have used, or we could have translated anyway, he lifted him up, right? But he doesn't. He uses the same verb of being raised up, because the idea is that these events are all God events, and they're precursing what God is going to do to Jesus by raising him from the dead as well. All right, so he does that. They say, why couldn't we drive him out? And this kind can only come out through prayer. Now, here's the debate. What's Jesus talking about? What is going on here?
So still being a little kind to them, they weren't able to do it themselves, but he is pointing out that they need to strengthen their faith in themselves and what they're able to do in him and what he has enabled them to do. So they couldn't do it because they didn't believe strong enough.
And what were they supposed to believe in?
The power that Jesus has.
Yeah.
That Jesus is God, and we need to pray this thing. We need to pray to God.
Now, in some of the other stories, when Jesus was told.
Oh, wait a minute. Lost you, Catherine. You still there, Catherine?
Yeah, can't hear. She's moving her
In
lips.
the other stories, Jesus actually talked to the demons. In this story, the demon was mute. So maybe has this anything to do with the reason why the disciples couldn't do anything?
I'm not so sure about that. It might be. Again, now let's put it in the context. Okay, let's not lose the story. Jesus and 3 of his disciples are up on the mountain, right? The other 9 disciples are hanging out, and this father brings them his son. And he says, I brought this guy for Jesus to heal. So what do the disciples think? What do you think the disciples say?
They probably say, well, we can heal him.
Yeah, Jesus ain't here, but hey, you know what? We could do it. And so why didn't it happen?
Maybe they didn't have a certain lifestyle of prayer that would yield this particular kind of spirituality. I don't know.
You know what? I thought they just didn't have the knowledge. They didn't know. They simply didn't know. This was a spirit that they came across that they had not come across before. And near the end, when they said, why couldn't we drive it out? Jesus didn't seem like he was angry with them. He said, this kind can only come out through prayer. So I think he was informing them that this was a different kind of spirit. So I think it's just.
I have a question.
I want to go back to
when he first hears they couldn't drive it out. When he first hears they couldn't drive it out, what was his experience? His response?
Oh, faithless generation.
Oh, you faithless generation. So he's disappointed at the least, right?
Yes.
I get the impression they could have done this. But why couldn't they do this?
They might have been able to do it had they prayed to God first, because everything that Jesus did, he prayed first, didn't he? Every miracle he performed, he prayed first. And that's what they didn't do.
Right. It's a question of knowing where the power is coming from.
That's right.
Right.
Okay. So what I think happened in the story is they're hanging out, waiting for Jesus and his buddies to come back down. They got nothing better to do. And somebody comes and says, "Hey, where's Jesus?" And they go, "Hey, he's up on the mountain. He ain't around." Well, gee, I'm sorry. I'm really disappointed because I brought my son. I thought he could heal them. And they go, "Oh, you don't need Jesus. We can heal him."
Right.
Right.
Exactly. They got a little
And
bit of egotistical right there.
yeah. And so they say, "Come on, hey, demon, get
We
out of
can
there."
do it. We can't.
Right.
And
I have a question. Had they been doing healings before? And
they
this was
had.
unusual?
They
Okay.
had.
Yeah.
So,
And
but
they were a little cavalier this particular event.
so
But
what?
you
Yeah, I
remember,
mean, don't forget when they were originally doing it, they had just been sent out and told to heal in Jesus's name, right? And now this is a while later. So what do you think happened to them?
They forgot the routine. They forgot. They became
Yeah.
complacent.
They well,
but if
He was sent
not
out
only
in
that, I
Jesus'
could
name.
even be worse than that. They started thinking that the power came from
was in
them.
them. Yeah,
Damn.
it's in them. 'Cause
And
They didn't
remember,
have a lack of trust in God.
yeah, well, they didn't need.
well, they didn't have enough trust in God.
Yeah, they didn't. They
Yeah.
didn't need God because they could do it.
And they
But they didn't
remember
pray
when
first.
Go ahead. What's that?
Jesus would go off to pray, they didn't really pay attention to Jesus going off to pray. Because they would go and get him. And it's like, okay, we need you now, so you can cut your prayer time. So
Yeah.
they didn't understand what was going on between Jesus and God during that time. So,
Good. Yeah.
yeah.
So Gwen, do you understand why I might not be as generous to them as you are?
I do. And
Now
so
I understand too.
I might not be as generous in the future.
So,
I mean,
you know, Jesus can be, you could be generous because if you think about it, these are young men and they do that kind of stuff sometimes, and they get in that room and they trying to show. I bet you all of them was trying to show what they could do. I could outdo the next person, and then they put themselves on the same pedestal as Jesus.
Right? They start posturing.
Without God's power. They try to put themselves in place of Jesus, and they didn't have the power of God behind them. Like somebody said, they forgot being very egotistical about this. I can do this. What's so special about Jesus? We can do this. He always showed us what to do and told us what to do, but he didn't have God's blessing. They didn't have God's blessing, and they didn't have Jesus' blessing. They had their own power, which is worthless.
So they
Especially in that
didn't
situation.
remember that they didn't remember that
May
they
I?
were acting in Jesus' name.
Right. Exactly.
May I add something? And that is that Jesus did give an explanation in that last line. He said to them, this kind can only come out through prayer. So I agree that they probably weren't giving reverence to God and their faith wasn't strong enough. But Jesus offered an explanation. So they apparently, were they driving other demons out without praying first or having strong faith? Because apparently they did something different in this particular event. And Jesus pointed to the fact that you have to pray for this. So I kind of see it in two different lights.
Yep.
You know, it's sort of like Gretchen. It's sort of like, sure, we do things sometimes. You know how we do things? We just go on our own power and do it, and then we come back and said, "I should have prayed first." And maybe they did the same thing, went out there and tried to do it and didn't pray. And Jesus knows that what you should have did first, you should have prayed first, and then maybe it would have worked. This only would have happened through prayer, not through
Yes.
your work.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, again, with so much of the scriptures, there's so many different ways of coming at this and seeing different ways of looking at it. There isn't just one way of understanding this story, but I do think what we learn from the story, and this is what we'll summarize to end the thing, is that ultimately we have to bring the problem to Jesus, or at least to God through Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is what the Father started off doing, right? I mean, he brought the son to Jesus.
Right.
And even if we're going to have intercessors, right? Even if they're going to be intermediaries like the disciples who are going to be helping us in this journey or praying for us or with us, we can't lose sight that it's not the intercessor who has the power. It's God who has the power. And the power flows through Jesus and through intercessors to others. But we can't ever make the mistake to think that it's the intercessor, especially when we might be the intercessor, who has that power. If you pray for somebody and they're healed, don't think you healed them.
Right.
God healed them. You may have been
it takes me back to when it says, whatever you ask of the Father in my name, it shall be done.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're the agents. God and Jesus are the ones that are making this stuff happen. We are intercessors. So even those of us who have devotions to saints and everything, that's one of the things that I think Catholics can be often legitimately criticized on, is too often we think the saint is doing that for us. But the saint is only interceding for us. It's still God and Jesus who are doing it. Okay. Even the Blessed Mother, if you say, ask the Blessed Mother and she'll do it. Well, no, it's ask the Blessed Mother and she will ask Jesus to do it. Because these are all intercessors. The power comes from God and Jesus, not from the saint, not from the intercessor, and not from us. And so I think this is one of the things that the story is trying to remind us, that even if we have the ability to intercede and just and expel spirits and heal people, remember the power isn't coming from us; it's coming from God. So the long and the short of it is, you bring your problem to God, or you bring your problem to Jesus. You got to have faith that God and Jesus can do something about it. And then you have to allow God or Jesus to do whatever it is they're going to do. And everybody else are just intercessors. They're just there to help, but they are not the source of the power. So it all comes back to bring your prayer, bring your trouble to Jesus, right?
Yes, and making sure that you have that relationship with God, with Jesus, with God, that relationship where you feel like you can talk to, and that's the importance of prayer, that you can have this conversation with God, with Jesus.
And don't tell Jesus if you can, right? He ain't going to be happy. So, all right, good. Well, that ends our story today, and we will pick up next week with the second prediction of the Passion. Okay.
Okay.